Welcome to the EXP Group, one of the leading providers of business training solutions. Please enjoy this presentation and visit us on the web at www.theexpgroup.com for more information.
Okay, now so far in Chapter 2 we've looked at a variety of models involving the environment. Pestle analysis, for example. Porter's diamond, Porter's competitive advantage of nations. Now what we're going to look at is another model by Michael Porter, and a very well-known one, and one which comes up quite often in the exam, is Porter's 5 forces. Porter's 5 forces analyzes the immediate environment around an organization, around a business. As the notes say, this model examines the role of 5 forces close to an organization that impact on its ability to make a profit, and hence how attractive a particular market or industry is. So, as the name suggests, there are 5 forces. First one we're going to look at is the threat of substitute products. Substitute products. Now, if there are similar products, then obviously a customer is more likely to switch to that other product rather than stay with the product when there are price rises. This is a classic case of elastic demand. If there are very limited substitute products, then we have inelastic demand and price rises. It's when the price rises, it's difficult for the customer to switch to a substitute product because there aren't that many substitute products. Okay, so the threat of substitute products will depend on, as it suggests, how many substitute products there are. The next one of the 5 forces, competitive rivalry. Now again, the rivalry will depend on the number and strength of competitors, economies of scale and exit barriers. So compare, for example, Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Intense competitive rivalry there, so there's going to be very strong competition. What about the Big Four? The Big Four, if you do a Porter's 5 forces for one of the Big Four, competitive rivalry would be quite high as well. The next one of the forces we're going to look at, threat of new entrants. Now, going through the notes, markets generating high returns, so profitable markets, would generally attract new entrants, which in turn could reduce industry profits. And introducing here an important thing, barriers to entry. Now, barriers to entry are things which are a barrier to enter that market. They are things which make it difficult for new entrants to enter that market. They're a barrier. Now, the example we've got here is a government license for mobile phone operators. So let's say in a particular country, a company wanted to go there and start the mobile phone business. They may be able to pay for the infrastructure, they may have the knowledge, the technology, but if they don't have the government license, it's going to be very difficult for them to start doing it. That's a classic case of a barrier. Various other barriers to entry are present. For example, economies of scale, capital commitments, branding. All of these are barriers to entry which can prevent organizations entering the industry. The next one, if we look at power of customers. The stronger the power of the customer, the more pressure it can place on the company. Okay, this kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Issues to consider include the size of the customer relative to the firm's customer base, switching costs, and availability of substitute products. So what we're saying is, if there is, for example, one major customer, that customer is going to have a strong position. That customer will have a strong force. Let's look at the power of suppliers. Now, suppliers of materials and services can exercise power over an organisation. Obviously, that the power of the supplier depends on the level of differentiation of the product. And hopefully the example we've got here will maybe clarify it. So compare the power of Intel, the computer chip manufacturer, of Intel supplying computer chips to the computer industry versus a sugar producer supplying sugar to a soft drinks manufacturer. The power of those two would be dramatically different. The computer industry, for example, they would need to purchase computer chips. There are only a limited number of suppliers that can produce those chips. So Intel would be in a strong position as a supplier. If you're a soft drinks manufacturer and you need sugar, well, sugar is really a very basic material, and there are a number of suppliers of sugar. So in that relationship, the supplier would be in a relatively weak position. Okay, if we look diagrammatically at this, and this isn't an official diagram, this is just to help you learn, so it doesn't have to be drawn like this in the exam. But when we analyse any organisation and we look at the immediate environment, there are 5 forces. Which one of those forces is the most important in any particular situation? Well, that would depend. That would depend on the exact situation. Remember, potential entrants. We have potential entrants to the market. Most important thing here is what barriers to entry can we put up? And remember, for example, what is a barrier to entry in order to start producing another super jumbo, an Airbus A380? What's the barrier to entry there? Well, economies of scale. You've got to. It's a billion dollar industry, a $1 billion project. You've got to be able to have the economies of scale to be able to manufacture sufficient planes to be able to sell to make it worth your while. That's the barrier to entry. What about the Apple iPod? Say I wanted to get into the MP3 music player business. What's the barrier to entry? Well, branding. I need to break into that branding. That's a barrier. Distribution channels. That's another barrier to entry. Then if we look at suppliers, remember the power of supplier, it would depend on how different the supplier is. And remember the example of Intel, the computer chip manufacturer, versus sugar producer for soft drinks manufacturer. What about customers? Obviously, the bigger, the more important the customer, the stronger their power would be. Smaller customers, limited amount of power in this relationship. What about substitute products? The more the availability of substitute products, the stronger the threat from this force, because it's easier for customers to switch to that substitute product. And then competition. So obviously, the more competitive the market, the bigger this particular force would be. So that's Michael Porter's 5 forces model.